Hello, and welcome to the Physical Therapy Owners Club podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Shields. And today, longtime friend and guest on the podcast, Sean Miller, is joining me. Sean, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you because last week you shared with me what you did when you owned your clinic in regards to generating job descriptions and handbooks and training manuals, that kind of stuff. And you made it so simple. You broke it down so easily. I thought, man, we need to share this with people because I think that can be a real stumbling block for owners when they know I've got to put together policy and procedure. I know I've got to do it, or I've read the E-Myth Revisited and I know that's what I got to do, but I don't know where to start. And so you broke it down so simply. I wanted to make sure you shared it with, or we shared it with as many people as possible. We did a Facebook recording yesterday and shared it on the Facebook group. And if you guys aren't on the Facebook group, that's Physical Therapy Owners Club, obviously. So join the Facebook group, but shared a 15-minute clip there. But in today's podcast episode, we want to go into a little bit more depth about creating job descriptions and handbooks and the benefits of them. I think the benefits are relatively obvious, but how to get them organized and put them together. Well, how to start from square one. So first of all, again, thanks for coming on, Sean. I appreciate it, man. When you started generating your job descriptions and handbooks, what was your mindset? What was your thinking? How did you get started to begin with? And for those who are watching this video, Sean's going to be sharing his screen and some of his PowerPoint stuff. So if you also look at the video on YouTube or the Facebook group, you'll be able to witness Sean's PowerPoint and some of the stuff that he's sharing today.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on again. I'm super excited to share this because it was super valuable for me because a little bit of my past history to give some base foundation of where I came from and why this is so important, I think, for everyone to have is, I had my clinics previously with a previous business partner and he and I just struggled to make things really work and run well. Mm-hmm. He and I unfortunately ended up separating from each other and I was kind of stuck with two facilities all by myself as the owner. And I was just bound and determined to figure out how do I make this thing work. Sought out coaching, had some great coaching that taught me a lot of great stuff. And in the framework of this, they teach you the importance of what we're going to talk about today. But we kind of came up with our own little method and process to putting it together that I think is very successful and works well. But why this is so important is when you provide organization and structure to your business, things will then absolutely start to run and flow and they go so much faster. Your growth goes so much faster.
Totally.
And I found that whenever we were not growing is because we weren't organized somewhere. And so as we organized it, we grew. And this is your foundation. I always tell people, this is the walls and structure of your house. You need to have these in place or all you have is a foundation, no building, Yeah. So what we're going to go through, we'll get to that. We'll build the walls here today.
Cool, man. Yeah, I think this is a great place to start because I like I said, I think a lot of owners might get stuck here or they might make it more complicated than it really needs to be. So break it down for us. How do you recommend we get started here?
Yeah, you bet. Let me share my screen for those who can see it on the video, and we'll kind of walk through what that is showing us here. But this is obviously building job descriptions and handbooks, how to do it. To be honest, it took me years to actually figure out how to do this. So this is why I'm excited to share this because I've learned from others and I love giving this out to other people so they can learn as well. Yeah. So this is why we're doing it, which is great. So we start off with, I read a book called E-Myth. You mentioned it, E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. If you haven't read it, definitely go read it. If you have read it, you may have kind of been stuck on how do I produce what he's talking about. And Michael Gerber basically in his book talks about producing consistent and predictable results within your company. Mm-hmm. That's the goal of his book. And what that does is once you can produce consistent and predictable results, it gives you freedom as an owner. It frees your time up. Mm-hmm. And when I started doing all this, I was working, 60, 70 hours a week to make things work. And then at the end, my time was now flexible however I wanted to spend it, which was great. So
Yeah, and to go further with that, they want to, in order to be really successful, you've got to reproduce those results over and over again, in spite of who's sitting in that position, and in spite of you. And that's where I think this creates so much value. It's not dependent upon you so much, or people dependent. It then becomes systems dependent.
yeah, you're totally right. I mean, you as the owner should know how to do everything in your company, but too often as owners, we find ourselves doing everything in the company. And by creating these job descriptions, it actually frees you up. So you're no longer the one doing it. You have
Mhm.
other people doing it. And like you said, if you have multiple clinics, you can do the same thing at all clinics across the board. And that's giving you the success.
Well, and even if you're not doing all of those positions, and you're growing to that point, you don't want to become the answer man all the time. I mean, you end up being the point person, the go-to, like, hey, have you got a minute, all the time on the door, or hey, I've got a problem. You're the only person that can fix it. You know, when you put some of these systems in place, then they can refer to the handbook versus you.
Such a great point and a great management lesson to learn. When someone comes to you, it's like, well, what's the handbook say? You know,
Totally.
and then they go back to the handbook, and soon they learn to go to the handbook first, and they begin to manage themselves. Is what
There's
the goal
so much power in that.
Yeah, super powerful. I love it. So that's kind of where this comes from. So how do you create the predictable results for your practice? Is you do that by developing your successful systems and processes that are reproducible and consistent. That's the key. Is successful system processes that you can reproduce and are consistent. And you do this by the creation of your job descriptions, or what we called handbooks. We actually ended up calling them playbooks in our company as we went, because I love sports, and the playbook is what you do to win the game. And so our playbook is what you do to win the game in our company, essentially. But whatever you want to call them, it's basically this is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So with these handbooks, once you've got them written up, that then becomes what you train and educate all your employees on, so that they know exactly how to do their job successfully, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you create these is what we want to talk about today. And there's really three simple steps when you're creating these to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is, what's the job title? A receptionist, a physical therapist, an aide, a biller, a lead biller, whatever your different jobs titles are, you want to create those job titles first.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is you then list all of the successful actions that someone has to do for that job title to succeed. And then third, and we'll talk about the order of these in a second more, but third is you then want to list what's called the outcome that you get from them doing these successful actions. This is better known as your product as well. And we'll talk about products here in a second, but the outcome is, what do you get if this person does these successful actions? And what's great about this is that when you have the outcome, that then becomes a KPI or a stat that you can use with the employee to measure how well they're doing their job,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. And that's really key, because once you have the stat then tells you, hey, you're doing a great job, or hey, you're not doing something. Let's figure out what it is and get it back in. So.
Yeah, and that's it's really cool that you broke it out so simply. I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about a table of contents that might have everything involved in the handbook, or the job description for any particular job. But the basic three principles are job title, successful actions, and then their outcomes with the appropriate measurable statistic.
You got it. Yeah. And once you understand that basis, then it becomes so much more simple to put these together.
Yeah.
Where it can get really complicated. And we'll talk about why it gets complicated here and how to make it even easier. So the first thing you want to really consider, if you look at those three things, is, too often what we do is we list the job title, and then we try to come up with all the successful actions. Like we'll say, okay, a receptionist, what's a receptionist do? And we'll list all these things that they think they do. And then what ends up happening is we don't know what they end up producing, what the outcome is.
Mm-hmm.
So what we actually want to first think about is, you first want to think about what is the outcome or the product, not the successful actions. So if I'm a receptionist, the outcome is I want my patients to arrive and paid in full for their visit to be seen. So now I know that is what the receptionist is trying to achieve with their job, essentially.
Yeah.
And so that's what we really want to first start focusing on, is what is their outcome or their product. So let's talk about what the product is, so we understand that a little bit better as well.
Mhm.
So product is technically it's a finished high quality service in the hands of the consumer as an exchange for something of value. If you can't exchange it, there's no value there. If I try selling you a half bottle of water, only half filled and the cap's open, it's not complete, right? You're not buying a full bottle of water. Or in like our case with physical therapy, if the patient comes in and their insurance benefits aren't verified and they're not paying their copay, we can't necessarily see them. We're not completing the process, essentially.
Yeah.
So,
and with this particular job, like if you're talking about a front desk receptionist, front desk coordinator, patient care coordinator, or whatever you want to call it, if you haven't figured out their product, the exchange is a salary that you give them, right?
exactly.
So if they are not performing and producing that product, then they are not living up to what is worthy of a salary, and there's not proper exchange there. So you want to be really clear about what they're exchanging for payment, for salary.
Correct. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Because you're exchanging with the front desk and your therapist, and they exchange back by achieving these goals for you, right?
Exactly.
These products in return.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great point. Great point. So the key is to first know your product and name it. What is it? So that they know what they're trying to achieve. What are you paying them for? Like you're saying, essentially, right? So the example we're kind of stuck on the receptionist, but you could reply to your therapist, whatever. But the way you would start is you would just list, okay, it's a receptionist, and you can see here successful actions is blank. We don't list them, but then we list the outcome of the product. And the product is, for me, it was patients arrive to all their prescribed appointments with payment in full. That's what I wanted my receptionist to achieve for us. And so then our KPI or our measurement was patient visits. So because we want patients to arrive. So how we track that? Patient visits. And then some substats that supported patient visits was percentage of arrivals and percent of copay collections. So we knew if the receptionist did those things, make sure that patients arrived and that they paid their copay, then they were achieving their outcome of patients arrived to all their prescribed appointments with payment in full.
That was their product.
That's their product.
It's a high arrival rate, all the copays and deductibles, you name it, collected at the time of service. That's their product, and you start from there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So now that I know what I want the receptionist to do, I can now create the successful actions to give me that outcome or those products. So that's the next step that you do, is you start thinking, okay, what are all the successful actions that someone needs to do to obtain that product or that outcome? And what I always encourage people to do first is just create a bullet point list of what they have to do. Like you can see here, answer the phone, enter patient information into the EMR system.
Don't get specific.
Yeah, don't get too
Just
specific.
Really generic, really general.
Real generic, simple. Collect copay, keep your area clean and organized. People, well, why is that part of the product? Well, because you want people to arrive, and if your facility doesn't look nice and clean, they may think less of your facility and actually not come back. So that's an important part of their process, right? So you just think of everything that could affect patient visits and people arriving, obtaining authorization, right? You just create this checklist of successful actions. And now you've got the premise of the foundation of your handbooks, essentially. So once you've done that, we then are going to go into make sure that everything's on that bullet point list, how it should be. And then we're going to go in and we're going to actually then define how we want to answer the phone, how we actually enter patient information into the system, how we actually collect the copay. And that's where you get more detail. And this is where you get to write down exactly the successful action of doing these different things. So a good example of this is like, okay, now I'm going to write up my playbook about how to answer the phone. And so you can see on the screen here, answer the phone would be in the manual, and it would say answer phones and direct calls where to as needed or as handle as you can. And then the subsection would be always answer the proper greeting. And this is key, right? If you don't put in how to answer the phone, they're going to answer it. This is Sean. How can I help you?
Or any way they want.
Sean, what do you want? Why are you calling me? Yeah.
Yeah.
But you train. This is what I want you to say. Hey, thanks for calling blank physical therapy. This is Sean. How can I help you? That's what I want you to say every time you answer the phone.
Mhm.
We put in there, always answer the phone within 3 rings. Why? Because how many times do you hear that phone just ringing and ringing and ringing? And it's like, somebody get the phone,
Yeah.
So policy was within 3 rings, you answer the phone. And then you just go on spelling out, what do they do with the phone calls? How
Mhm.
to route phone calls. Like we have a thing in here that if it's ever a doctor calling to speak with a therapist, ask them to hold and go get the therapist. Do not take a message,
Yeah.
because too
Yeah.
many times our receptionist, when I first started, oh, Dr. So-and-so, I'm going to take a message for you, So it's like, no, doc's
Do
on the
not.
phone.
Do
Don't do
not.
that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to find out. We're going through it pretty quickly here, but this is something that takes some time. I mean, you could figure out job titles are obvious, and you can figure out the products in the course of an hour or two for all of your positions and the appropriate statistics related to it. And even the bullet points could be pretty quickly. But this part where you're really getting into the weeds could take some time, right? And it
Yes.
might be some feedback. It might be some back and forth. And I shared this on the Facebook group video yesterday, but this is something you could also hand off to people who are doing it successfully already. If you have someone at the front desk that is awesome, how freeing is it to say, hey, you do really a good job. If you could just write down how you answer the phone on a regular basis and all the things that pertain to answering the phone, all the ins and outs and details in different situations, take 15 minutes, write that out for me. I'd appreciate it. And then you could have something to go off of here for the next week or two and really figure out the answer the phone bullet point.
Yeah. No, you bring up an amazing point. That if you want to overwhelm yourself really fast, sit down and try to create these for everybody in your company in a couple of days,
By
right?
yourself.
Just by yourself. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
This took me probably better part of 6 months to a year to create these. And then even once they were created, we were constantly modifying them and tweaking them to make them even better over time.
Yeah.
And once we finally understood this, it even got even easier. But you're right in that, you are probably not the best receptionist in your company. You know what needs to be done, but you probably have a rock star somewhere in your company that does a great job at it. So why are you the one writing this? They should be the one writing it for you, essentially. And the one thing I like about it too is when you involve your employees, they feel like they're part of the process. They feel like they're helping you build your company as well. And everyone wants to feel included. Everyone likes to participate and give their feedback, and can't be better advice in creating these than actually having somebody else help you create them for each position as you go.
Yeah, it's a real way of recognizing their value, and
Yeah.
people want to be recognized, and this is a way for them to say, oh yeah, this is how I do well at my job. And
Yeah.
so let's codify that and put it down for people that follow.
Yeah, exactly. And if someone's crushing it, you want to know how they're doing it. What are they doing to crush
Totally.
that?
Right.
So you can turn around and give that to all your other facilities, or even train your other receptionists so they can do a really good job just as well.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, that's a great point. The other thing to point out too is as you start to write these is don't get caught up in writing too much detail. Answering the phone as an example here. Like I don't want to put in here, answer the phone with your right hand and bring it to your ear. Like it's just kind of self-given, right? Kind of write these at about a 3rd to 5th grade level of understanding of instruction. And I say 3rd to 5th grade because you can get too detailed and you can not have enough details in there as well. Like you could put answer the phone when someone calls. Well, how do I route the call if it's a doctor's office? How do I do this? What do you want me to say? Like those details need to be in there as well. So always think 3rd to 5th grade level of if I'm telling someone how I want to answer the phone in my company, 3rd to 5th grade level of how I want that done, essentially.
There you go.
Yeah. Simple instructions with it. So now that you've kind of created this, let's go, if you don't mind, let's go to the outline of how to create the full handbook. If that's okay. I think that'd be a good
You're talking like a table of contents of what a handbook would look like.
Yeah. Because you've got all these checkpoints lists, but it's like, how do I organize these? How to answer the phones? How to put the copay in? That can be a process for you as well too.
Sure.
And we came up with a pretty good simple outline that I think can be very helpful for these guys as well. So I'm going to share this with you real quickly. Blow it up a little bit more. So if we're creating a front desk, receptionist manual, what we did is, our very first page would just be the cover page, our company logo. Then our second page, we had a welcome letter from the owner. We then listed our company's purpose, mission, and values on page 3. And then we listed our communication lines, our organization board. That's a whole nother topic of discussion. If you don't have one of these, it's really great. It lets your people know, who do I go to if I have a question for my position? And then
who's my supervisor? Who's my
yeah,
supervisor's supervisor? Where do I fit in the
exactly.
organization? It's always good to know.
Yeah, who's my boss? Who gives me orders? And who can tell me I'm not doing a good job, and who can tell me I'm doing a great job?
That's right.
So, and then on page 5 is where you would actually then list the position. You would say receptionist, and you would list their purpose and their products, and then you would list their KPIs, which we just worked out from doing our first step there.
Yeah.
And then what we did from there is we found really helpful to create a daily, weekly, monthly checklist. Because a lot of times, people have their receptionist checking the mail. Well, is that daily or weekly? Or they do the deposit. Is that daily or weekly? Yeah. So we would create on a day-to-day basis, this is what you do. On a week-to-week basis, this is what you do. And then once a month, you would do this. Yeah. And then what you find in these daily, weekly, monthly checklists are things like answer the phone, check patients in, call referrals, things like that would be on your daily checklist.
Confirmation calls. How often are you doing those? If you're assessing the active patient list with the clinic director or the owner, is that a weekly thing? Is that a bi-weekly thing? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you're laying out successful daily things that they should be doing to achieve their outcome or achieve their product for them, essentially. And then once you have those daily, weekly, monthly checklists done, within those are your specific actions, which we just created, right? Which is like answering the phone. How do I maintain a high arrival rate? How do I schedule patients? How do I obtain authorization? How do I handle referrals? How do I collect copays? How do I verify insurances? All that would then be after the checklist written in there. So on the daily checklist, let's say it says, call all referrals and schedule them appropriately. Well, how do I do that? Well, number 9E tells you how to handle the referrals and what to do, essentially.
Yeah, there you go.
So just spells it all out for them, nice and simple, and gives them a great layout of how to put all this together, essentially. So,
and that's the bulk of the handbook, right? It's just a lot of that is just the how-tos, and some of them could be written, some of them could be videos. Here, watch this video from the EMR company about how to enter a patient. So yeah, I think many times we might lean on ourselves to do things that the EMR companies typically have already, generated videos for. Or it could be very helpful if we generated our own videos, like instead of people putting pen to paper, well, which they don't do so much nowadays, but you know what I mean? But if they could just record the screen, there's so many softwares that can do that and just talk along with it. I know Loom does that. I've used it before, and say, okay, I go to this screen and then I'll type in their name and then I do this and I do that. And that's how I collect the copay and implement it into the EMR. And love it could be really, really simple. And then if anyone finds a problem with that in the future, their job is to then create the next video.
That's right. Update the video.
Update the video, please.
Well, and to give you an idea, right, when I first created my first handbook for the front office, I think it was about a 30-page document. As technology got better, not to say I'm old, but as technology got better, we started creating screenshots of where to put the copays and all this stuff like that. Yeah. And I think my last handbook before everything was around 110 pages.
Oh my gosh.
By the time it was done. So, but it was very detailed with photos and here's this, here's that, because, if somebody was like, well, how do I record the copay? Well, here's a screenshot picture, which gives them a visual of where it is on the computer and to do it. And nowadays, like you're saying, video is like the next step to go to in creating these things.
Makes it really easy.
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. And what's great about this, and we talked about this yesterday, is, I don't need someone who's an experienced front desk receptionist in physical therapy. I need someone who is competent and can get things done, because I can train them and give them this handbook and they can just run with it because they're a person who can get things done, essentially, which is great.
And the cool thing about this handbook, and to take it further, the value of it is so much of it you can essentially cut and paste and then it becomes the training manual, right?
Exactly.
So a training manual with its own checklists or check boxes that you can check initial date that the training actually got done.
Yep.
So it can guide you on the training. So it's
Yep.
not just the job description and the handbook of how to do things. It's also, okay, you are now a blank. This is your handbook. Let's go over it step by step and we'll check it along the way to ensure that you're fully trained.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you're right on. So what we always did is we would take these bullet points right here and we would just take them and put them on a separate page and call it the training page. And we would say, okay, has Nathan been trained on how to answer the phone? Yes. Check. Okay. Has he been trained on how to get a high arrival rate? Yep. Okay. Check. And we just go right down the list of everything that's in the handbook and that he can do it and that he knows what he's doing. And yeah, it becomes a simple training manual as well. Exactly.
Well, then the accountability on the back end is, okay, someone complained about answering the phones or our arrival rate dipped. So you have a section in there on how they maintain, how to handle cancellations, how to reschedule patients, how to maintain a high arrival rate. So if your arrival rate dips, you can go back to the handbook and say, okay, are we following all the steps that we are trained on, or are we missing something? So do we need to re-input what we were trained on because it fell out? Or do we need to modify what's currently being trained in because our arrival rate continues to go down? You can go back and inspect those statistics that they're responsible for, right?
Exactly. That the beauty of everything you said there, right? If you think about it, it's the training manual. It's how to something for on a day-to-day basis for me to refer to. And then if my stats or my KPIs are out of whack, we already have all the successful actions. If we're doing everything right in this handbook, our stats shouldn't be out of whack. And so we go right back to the handbook and figure out what am I not doing essentially to achieve the result that I'm looking for. It's all in the handbook,
Yeah, that's cool. And I like you have other sections in there about definitions for words that you might use. And the last section that you have is some anatomical terms and definitions, because we can't assume that these front desk people are going to know what we're talking about when we throw out some of the medical terminology.
Yeah, you get someone who's never been in healthcare or even have been in healthcare, not physical therapy. We have all our little acronyms that we like to use, like even insurance, like BCBS, well, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Of course, we know that, or UHC. We know what those are, right?
Yeah.
Or even the word KPI. What's a KPI? Any acronym you might use, you want to give everybody an understanding of what that word is, so when they see it, they know what you're talking about. Essentially,
we actually even had a video of the difference between co-pays, co-insurances, and deductibles.
Oh,
so we
that's
found
nice.
right. So I had to find that online and have them watch that a couple of times so that they understood the difference between them as we're talking about the differences and as they're dealing with insurances.
And is there a more important person in your office that should know what the difference between those three things are? No one more important than that receptionist, because patients don't know, they have no idea. No
exactly.
idea.
And I love that you talked about going into the product first, because if you simply sit down and write down all their successful actions, you're going to apply equal priority to all these things. All of them are urgent. All of them are 8 out of 10. They've got to get done. But when you really focus on the product first, then you can say, okay, this is the crux of your position. Other things could possibly fall by the wayside, but if you're not getting patients in, and if you're not collecting their copays and deductibles, and you have verified all the insurances, well, you're not really doing your job.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it all comes down to these specific things that you've got to get done, right?
True. And a lot of people will cross-train their receptionists or other people to help with other things, right? Like, hey, go back and help do the laundry. Well, that's important, but what's more important is calling the referrals or getting those other things done specifically. Exactly. So focus on that product. Yeah.
We focused on the receptionist. Did you find that was like the most training that you did, or were there other handbooks for physical therapists just as time intensive and consuming?
The therapist one is time and consuming for different reasons. In that, in the receptionist one, I'm teaching you how to be a receptionist or a front desk person, right? Like how to answer the phone, how to treat patients, how to do all this stuff. With the therapist one, I'm not putting in there how to treat a patient, right? You got your license, you should know how to treat a patient. But a lot of therapists don't know how to manage a patient's expectations. They don't know how to make sure a patient is on the same page with you in terms of your treatment and their progress and what they're doing. So we actually put a lot of successful things in there on how to successfully manage your caseload.
Yeah.
Most people, one of the number one complaints in therapy is documentation. So we actually developed a step-by-step process of how to successfully have your notes done before you go home every day.
Yeah.
And so there was a whole flow of how to do your notes throughout the day. And we would teach them those successful steps so that at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night, they don't have 15, 20 notes to do for that day. They've only got one or two, to finish up essentially.
Yeah. It
So
sounds like a lot of what your training was more of the soft skills related
correct.
to physical therapy. That was more of the handbook for the physical therapist. I mean, you could get into, I guess I interviewed Tom DeLonzo Baker, and there was a time in his clinics where they sat down and said, okay, if Tom's not going to be here all the time, we need to agree on some basic fundamental stuff on how to treat a shoulder. And so you could, maybe throw some of that in there, just some basic fundamentals that, these are the proven methods to treat certain diagnoses or body parts. You could get into that, but I think the bulk of a physical therapist handbook is going to be how to get patient buy-in to your plan of care, how to maintain compliance so they don't fall off or drop off after 3 to 5 visits. How do you keep their goals in front? Well, number one, how do you extract what their goals are with physical therapy, and how do you keep those goals in front of them so that keeps them coming, right? And so it sounds like it was a little bit more, and I love the fact that you put in their documentation, because to borrow from Sean Kirk, our co-mentor, coach, consultant, is the 3 things a physical therapist has to do when you really boil it down is treat the patients well, document your visits appropriately, and bill appropriately. Right. So you're kind of so you're and those are honestly your stats, right? I mean, get your total visit number and documentation in a timely manner, and bill appropriately and ethically. Don't underbill, don't overbill, of course. But bill appropriately for what you do according to your documentation. Those are your 3 things, right? And manage those stats. But so much of their handbook then is about it's almost like the sales process of physical therapy, huh?
It really is. I have a little bit of one here that I put up on the screen.
Oh, cool.
Some of the actions we would train them on, like how to properly schedule your patients, how to manage your time. What's a standard visit look like? Like, number one complaint of patients is that therapists never put their hands on the patient. So always put your hands on the patient. How do you control a conversation? So many times a therapist would complain to us that a patient comes in and they start telling you their entire history from when they're 8 years old. And that doesn't really matter or doesn't really relate to what you're treating them for. So how do you control that conversation so you can manage your time? We would put in there proper documentation, proper coding and billing expectations, because not every insurance is the same in your state. And so you got to understand and train them on this insurance you need to bill this way, this insurance you need to bill this way. So you're putting all these things in here to be successful as a therapist.
And so much of this stuff they didn't come to you with typically if they're coming out of physical therapy school, and they may have learned other ways at other practices, or maybe they didn't get any training whatsoever. But how awesome is it for you to then be able to put this in front of your PTs and then provide and then have some consistency, like we're talking about, how do we reproduce similar results over and over again? And if someone can't follow these instructions and the way we do it at Blank Physical Therapy, then you know what? I'm sorry, we'll find someone else who can.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what's great about these books, right? Is you train them on it, and they start doing their job and they start performing well. And then also they're not performing well, you go back to the book, and then they get back in line. Not want to say get back in line, but they start following the successful processes to get the results again. And if they can't do it, it's either A, they don't want to, or B, they just can't do it. And, and that's where we have to make the move of letting them go and finding somebody who can, essentially.
So how long did this take you from beginning to end? You said about 6 months before you really felt comfortable that you had the beginnings or the basics of handbooks for each position in your company?
Yeah, so I had about 6 months. I had the handbooks for all of the positions within the company, and then we were refining them throughout that first year. The best advice I could give you, though, is don't wait until you have 6 months to start rolling stuff out. And so an example of that would be when we came up with what we called, a standard visit procedure, say, for a physical therapist, we would actually roll that policy out. Okay, when somebody comes in for therapy, this is what we want or expect to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had this thing called 5 points of contact, which is when a patient comes in, you ask them 5 things, and you do these 5 specific steps every time they come in for a patient visit. So
Mm-hmm.
we would roll that out before I had the handbooks done at 6 months. And
Mm-hmm.
so what was great is by the time we got to the 6-month time frame, a lot of this stuff they had already heard about and been trained on.
Oh, okay.
So when I gave them the book, they're like, oh yeah, this is standard visit procedure. Oh, this is the proper coding and billing thing you gave us 2 months ago, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I was rolling it out at a gradient over time versus just, here's this 80-page manual on how to do your job, you know?
Yeah, I gotcha. No, that's
Yeah.
great. And I think that provides, I'm trying to think about it from the employee standpoint, that this probably provides them some comfort, structure. I mean, when you have some structure like that, there's some comfort, maybe confidence is a better word, in the system itself, in the company. Like, okay, this is what we do. This is kind of our, like you said before, this is our playbook. This is what we rally around. And this is how we know we're going to win the game.
Yeah. This is our expectations, and this is how we're going to win. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
if whatever type of football fan you are, whether it's a Patrick Mahomes or a Tom Brady, but if they go out there and they decide to run their own plays, nobody knows what he's doing, and then the plays fall apart.
Yeah.
But if everybody's on the same page of what we're doing and how we do things, then it just rolls, it just runs, and it just
Mm-hmm.
goes by itself. And you'll know when something's out because it will just feel like, what's going on? Why are we struggling all of a sudden? And it's usually because somebody within the organization or in that clinic is not doing something they should be doing. And so you figure it out and then you move forward.
It's almost like the play was designed to go to the right, and they all of a sudden went to the left for some reason.
It went to the left. Exactly. It's like, what are you doing over there?
What are you doing, dude? Get back over here.
Yeah. What do you mean? What do you mean you're not calling the referrals every day to get them scheduled? No wonder we don't have any new patients right now. You know?
That's right.
Or
Yeah. So I guess it's a lot easier then for you to take this, and then, whether you're purchasing another clinic or opening another clinic, then the ease of that is significantly greater, huh?
It is. Yeah. And what's great about it is once you have the playbook, when you go to open another clinic, it's just, you just move it over and put it in, it's just cookie cutter, I know when we bought a clinic and we brought this to them, everybody at that clinic was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. And everybody felt like all of a sudden their jobs got easier because it provided structure and organization for them. And they were just like, and we doubled their business in like 3 months. And they were like, oh my gosh, we're so busy, but we feel like we're not as busy as we used to be, So it's awesome.
And to take it further, since we're talking about growth and expansion, how easy is it then once you have expanded to have like the clinic expansion checklist? I mean, this is what you do. These are the steps that you take, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it has credentialing, and it has equipment that you purchase, and here are some time frames, and make sure this is the kind of lease that you have. All those kind of things can then be an expansion checklist, right?
Yeah, exactly. What are all the things that made you successful when you opened a clinic?
Mm-hmm.
And you just create that checklist, and then you just follow. It's a recipe.
Yeah.
It's the playbook on how to make it successful.
Yeah. And you really aren't creating it from thin air. You were successful with one clinic, building it up to that certain point. Just try to take what you learned from that, the do's and the don'ts, and write it down, and put some time frames to it. Be a little bit conservative and give yourself some time to get things done. But it can be easily done if you just take the time to do it.
Yeah. Well, and then another part of that is kind of what we're doing here today, and that's network. Ask other people what they did. I learned from a ton of people. And what's great is you learn from them what you like, and then you put your own flavor on it, and then it makes it work and go. And, why make mistakes that somebody else already made? Learn from their mistakes so you don't have to make them,
Well, yeah, that's the total benefit of networking. Like you said, that's why I do this podcast, and also have the Facebook group, is to make sure people recognize that there are resources out there that can help you do this. Some of these handbooks, some of these playbooks, if you will, are available on PPS, right?
Yep.
You can find some of them, and like you said, put your own flavor spin on them, or ask people specific questions then in other forums. Yeah,
agree. I would only say, whatever you take anyone's playbook or handbook, make sure it spells out how to do the job successfully. Because too many times it will just say, answer the phones, check patients in, You
Yeah.
know, it's like, that's not enough detail, you know?
Yeah. That's not quite enough.
Yeah, not
Right.
enough.
Got it.
It's too high level. So,
Right.
yep.
Well, hey, thanks for sharing the way you broke down this stuff so simply. It's almost too easy.
Yeah.
But obviously it takes some time. If people wanted to ask you questions about some of the details that you shared today, how do they get in touch with you, Sean?
Yeah, the best way, if you're on the Facebook group, you can reach out to me through Facebook, but email is always great. My email is S.A. Miller, and then the number is 8020. So S.A. Miller 8020 at gmail.com. This is kind of what I'm doing now, is helping other businesses and business owners. And it's a lot of fun. It's great to see other people succeed with it as well.
Definitely. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
You bet. It was great. Thanks, Nathan.